Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Basic Thoughtonomics podcast. I'm your host, Chris Grosso, and for this episode, we're going to talk some baseball, talk a little Mets, with opening day being scheduled for tomorrow, but obviously we know it's been pushed back due to the coronavirus pandemic, but very excited to have this guest on. He covers the Mets for MLB.com, Mets.com. He's Anthony DiComo, and Anthony, how you doing today? How's everything going? Hope primarily you're staying safe and healthy, but how's everything going so far?
Everything's okay. Yeah, it's a tough time. It's a difficult time, I know, for a lot of people. But I think we're all just doing the best we can to get by. So I'm lucky I have my health. I've got a nice apartment to while away my days, and hopefully this is all over for all of us as soon as possible.
Yeah, I share those same sentiments. So just kind of taking things one day at a time and having gratitude, putting things in perspective. I like that. So, So I'll get into it here. I'm more just first. We'll get into Syndergaard and the Tommy John surgery as that was announced Monday, and obviously a huge blow to the team. But just first wanted to talk about the coronavirus and how its impact on the game, and I kind of want to get your perspective on it. What's your big picture kind of thoughts on it? Like your outlook, your general reaction to it, be it from a personal standpoint, from a baseball standpoint. Just what do you kind of think, and what's your reaction to everything that's going on?
Well, it's tough. It's tough to have a reaction because we don't really know any of the answers yet in terms of what's going to happen from here, both with the world at large and what's going on with this disease, and also in our little insular world of baseball, what's going to happen, what the season is going to look like, if there will be a season, all those things. So it's tough to kind of have an opinion on things that we don't know about yet. But it's if you take out of if you remove yourself from the knowledge that obviously what's going on out there in the world is not ideal for anyone, and it's ruined a lot of things for a lot of people. It's upended lives. It has resulted in a lot of sickness. Yeah, a lot of sickness and a lot of death and all of that. With that as the backdrop, anything like baseball seems insignificant at this time, and I think most people realize that. But that being said, baseball is a thing that a lot of people care about. It has a history of kind of helping us get through things. And obviously we can't play games right now. We can't have the teams play games right now. But talking about baseball, thinking about baseball, looking forward to baseball, I think is something that can be healthy for a lot of people and has been healthy for a lot of people. So, in my job, anything I can do in my small little day to maybe helps take someone's mind off what's going on out there, occupy a few minutes of their time reading a story, listening to a podcast such as this one, anything like that, if it helps or touches or makes one person's life easier, then that's a good thing, because none of us know how long this is going to last. Obviously, we all hope it's as short as possible, but until we know for sure, we just have to move forward the best we can and try and stay healthy and happy and do all the things that will make us that.
Yeah, I mean, I see your outlook. I kind of agree with those sentiments. You kind of just got to, do the little things. Try and, help someone out, like you said, coming on this podcast or, just little things to help everyone out. I definitely see your perspective on that. As far as, switching kind of back to baseball, I read today an article that the season is obviously it's been delayed. At first it was 2 weeks. Then they said mid-May. Now I'm hearing like early June that the earliest that baseball might come back. I just want to see if you had heard anything in regards to that early June timeline. Have you heard that? Are you optimistic about that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm an optimistic person in general, so I am optimistic that there will be a season at some point this year. That's not any insider knowledge or anything like that. I don't know because Major League Baseball doesn't know, because the health officials around the country and around the world don't know. And it's going to be a while before we have the answers to those questions. And I know everyone wants to, pin down a date. But the fact of the matter is, like I said before, this is something that's that's bigger than baseball. It's bigger than sports. And
Right.
MLB and the other leagues around the country have acknowledged that. They're deferring everything as they should and as they must to the health officials and the governments around the world. I live in New York. I cover the Mets who play in New York, and this is an area and a city that has been particularly hard hit by the coronavirus.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
it could take longer here than in other places. We don't know. That's the thing. And I sound a little bit like a broken record, but it's true is that we just don't know. We have no real history to go on.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Other than kind of watching, watching closely what's happened in China and in Italy and Korea and the measures that those countries have taken and in starting to get their own outbreaks under control. Maybe gives us a little bit of a guideline, but in terms of extrapolating that and predicting what it's going to mean for this country and specifically what it's going to mean for our ability to start professional sports leagues and amateur sports leagues and everything else like that back up again, I just don't know. But as I said, I'm optimistic. I think if there is a way, within the parameters set by the CDC, set by local government, set by a national government, if there is a way to play baseball, then MLB is going to try to play baseball because, as I said in my last answer, it's something that is important to a lot of people and I think can help a lot of people heal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we saw after 9/11, but obviously this is a completely different situation in so many respects. But just going back to the season, what would you constitute? How many games would be a legit season in your opinion? Would it be if they could get 100 in, if they could get 81 in? What's that number in your mind?
Yeah, well, I'm of the opinion that 162 games might be a little long anyway. I don't know if
a lot of people feel
I don't
that
know.
way.
And I've always kind of been a proponent that even if you cut back to like 154 as it used to be back in the day, maybe a little more palatable, but you could certainly make an argument that even less than that would be okay. And I think, looking at this situation logically, it's hard to envision a scenario in which, they play deep into 140, 150 games, something like that. It'll probably be less than that. And I think that's enough. I think you see, baseball is unique from the other sports in that it's every single day, right?
Right.
It's 162 games, but, even if it winds up being 81 games this year or 100 games, you're still going to have that every single game. You might have more if you're some of these ideas you hear kicking around about maybe lots of double headers and things like that. So I don't think you're going to lose that cadence of the season in which teams are playing every single day. Teams have to strategize for the long haul, playing every single day. I can tell you as someone who's covered baseball for a long time now and seeing the ebbs and flows of a season, you get to June 1st, and if you're not equipped to handle the long haul, you can be gassed in those 2 months. You can get gassed in a couple of weeks if you're not handling it right. So all that's still going to be in play. And you're not necessarily going to have some of those storylines where a team, that was out of it, like the Nationals, for example, that was out of it in May, making a late season run. But, everyone's going to know what the schedule looks like going into it. So you could still see some plenty dramatic things in 81 games or in 100 games or whatever it might be. So your question, what is the minimum for it to be good, appropriate?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Honestly, I think any bit of baseball would be good. And if it's less than 81, if it's less than 60, if it's whatever, there are creative things you can do. You can make kind of like a tournament series. You can do various different things. It doesn't have to look like a normal baseball season because I think we all have to acknowledge that it's not a normal baseball season. No matter what happens from here on out, it's not going to be a normal baseball season. We've had that in the past in MLB, whether it's because of wars or because of 9/11 or because of various things. There have been seasons that have been unique in MLB schedule-wise for various reasons. And, I think we can look back on this years down the line and whatever it winds up being, whether that's 30 games or 60 games or 100 or whatever, I think it's still worth playing if there's an opportunity to play safely and within the guidelines of what the government says is okay.
Yeah, I get where you're saying. We all want the game to come back, no matter how many games it is, but I don't know. For me, I feel like it would have to be at least half a season. I don't know. I wouldn't be into that. I don't know, some kind of tournament or anything like that. I don't know. That's because, like I said,
I
it's
disagree
every
because
day.
I think you get to. I think
that's
let's
a charm of
say
baseball. It's every day, kind of. And I know.
sure, but let's say hypothetically, we get and it's August 15th, and that's when teams are cleared to play in front of fans, things like that. I mean, that's a solid month and a half of baseball that people could have and like and enjoy and soak up time of their stars in their primes. You don't want to see another year of Jacob deGrom in his prime. If you got 6 weeks to do it or 8 weeks to do it late in this season, I think people would like to see that, and especially coming off, what is looking like it's going to be a hard summer for a lot of people. I think it could be good. If there's a chance for baseball this year, I want to see baseball regardless of what the actual structure of a season or a tournament or anything like that would look like.
All right, yeah, I see. Some good points, some good arguments you make there. And I also just wanted to get your thoughts. Like, baseball was in a unique position that this all happened when spring training was underway. When and if it does come back, do you have any idea if spring training will start up again? How long it will be? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to have to be another spring training. Guys need that time, especially pitchers need that time to build up. Hitters too need that time to get their timing back and at the plate and everything like that. So you're going to need a period. I don't think it needs to be 6-7 weeks like we see every year.
Yeah.
That's almost more precautionary for a lot of teams. That really allows teams to do what they want in terms of easing guys in. I think you can be a little more aggressive and I don't know, probably do a spring training in around 3 weeks, something like that would be enough time for guys to get in the shape that they need to be. It's also going to depend a little bit on some of the rules that the league enforces, whether that's expanded rosters, taking into account what's going on,
right.
How long the season is going to be. All those are going to play a role. So, yeah, I think you're going to need a spring training. I think it'll be probably less than half of what we normally see in spring training, but they'll figure that out once they get a better grasp on when and how exactly they can start this thing back up.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more a unique situation, too, for the pitchers, given that they operate on such a regimented kind of schedule. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they kind of adjust to this. And obviously, you're not a player, but you've been covering the game for such a long time. If you could, maybe just take me into the mindset of a player right now, like with all this going on. They're getting ramped up for spring training, getting ready to go, getting all the reps in. Then they have to shut it down, and no one knows for how long of a period of time. It might feel like the off season for them again. Just if you could, like I said, you're not a player, but what do you think their mindset is right now, whether it be position player, pitcher? What do you think in regards to that?
Yeah, it's not easy because there's no end date.
Right.
You go into an off season as a pitcher, and it's different for everyone. People go through their routines in different ways, but they all go through it knowing, okay, around February 15th, I have to be ready. I have to be in Florida or Arizona ready to go. That's not the case now. They might need to be ready on May 15th. They might need to be ready on July 15th. They don't really know. So I think a lot of these guys are kind of doing what they can in terms of keeping their arms, keeping their bodies in shape, but also not spending bullets that they don't have to. And what I mean by that is there's no reason, for example, for Jacob deGrom, who is stretched out to probably about 50, 60 pitches when we last saw him in spring training. There's no reason for him to stay stretched out to that level or to keep stretching out up to 70, 80, 90 pitches. He can do that once we get back to spring training. But he also doesn't want to just shut down completely and sit on his couch and do nothing. He needs to kind of keep his arm in shape. And, for a guy like deGrom specifically who loves throwing a lot in the off season, that means doing the same. That means going out and playing catch every single day. It doesn't necessarily have to be super labor intensive, but just making sure that arm does not kind of go into hibernation, I think is important for him and for all sorts of pitchers. It's going to be tough. I think we're going to look back on this and, we've looked back, for example, on World Baseball Classic years, WBC years, and people have studied, does that increase injury risk because you're doing things to pitchers that they haven't done before? Now, that's a different situation because you're asking some of those guys to pitch more, not less. Right. But asking guys to rest more, can that hurt them? We don't know. We're not going to know the answers. We might never know the answers. Anecdotally, we might look back and say yes or no based on how many guys end up on the DL, how guys perform versus how they performed historically. This is novel for everyone. No one really knows the correct answer for a lot of this stuff because no one's ever done it before. There's no history to guide us. All we can do is kind of take the information that teams have compiled over the years in terms of best practices to keep guys healthy, best practices to get guys ready for a season, and kind of implement them as best they can using the knowledge that they have.
Right. And yeah, certainly a unique situation, something like unprecedented we've never seen before. So we'll see how the players, coaches adjust to everything going forward. But now I just want to talk some Mets a little bit. Obviously, the huge news Monday took me by surprise. I think most Mets fans by surprise. But Noah Syndergaard going to undergo Tommy John surgery, going to miss this whole season if there is a season, and a chunk of next season as well. Just how did all this come about? He last started on March 8th against the Astros. Do you know if there was pain in the elbow after that start, or when the pain kind of started? Was he just doing side sessions on his own? Is that when the pain started? Do you have any insight into that?
My understanding is this isn't something that I wouldn't necessarily use the word pain. I don't think this is something where Noah Syndergaard threw a pitch and said, "Oh God, I just blew out my elbow." No, I think it was something much more subtle than that. Elbow barking a little bit, and this is how it happens for some pitchers. Elbow barking a little bit throughout the spring. You try and treat it. You try and pitch through it. Probably not something that Noah thought was anything super major in terms of needing surgery or anything like that, but he did wind up getting an MRI after the shutdown, and that revealed a torn UCL. And my sense is that took Noah a little bit by surprise, that he wasn't expecting something that serious or that major, but lo and behold, that's what it is. That's what we're looking at now. So yeah, when things like this happen, I think you always want to go back and say, oh, what if he had done this differently? What if he had maybe backed off and not started in spring training? But you make the best decisions at the time with the information that you have. And I don't think he or the Mets thought this was something that they were putting him at risk by going out there. I don't think anyone thought this was a situation in which Noah Syndergaard was going to need Tommy John surgery, but lo and behold, it is. And now the Mets are looking at a full season, however long that season is, but a full season without him.
Yeah, and just if there is a season, just how big of a blow would you characterize this? Good. It's a good thing they got some depth, signing Porcello and Waka, and I assume just between the three of them, Steven Matz, Porcello, Waka, they'll all be in the rotation now, given they're healthy and everything. But how big of a blow is this? How would you describe it?
I think it's a massive blow for a team that had World Series aspirations. Yeah. I understand that Noah Syndergaard hasn't been the pitcher or hasn't filled the potential that people thought he would necessarily when he came up in 2015 and was so good so quickly. But that being said, it's not easy to have a guy who comes in, you can pretty much count on him giving you 200 plus innings, and in Syndergaard's case, 200 plus above average innings, if not potentially elite innings. So that's a big blow. It's a massive blow. And the Mets did make pitching depth a priority this offseason, and they're sure glad they did now because they have Waka, they have Porcello. They have more in that 6 through 10 starter range that they did a year ago. And they got lucky a year ago in that they didn't really need that depth. They didn't really have a lot of depth. They didn't wind up needing it. Exactly. So this year they do have that depth, and they're going to tap into it early. That being said, it's a big blow. Is it something they can't overcome? No, I think they can overcome it. They could potentially still be a very, very good team. They could still be one of the best teams in the National League. But you can't just sit here and say that and pretend that it's not going to make the Mets worse. It is going to make the Mets worse. And I think almost the more interesting aspect in Syndergaard's case, or in the Mets case, is what this does to them in 2021, because you're going to go into next offseason now, essentially with two starting pitchers under contract in Jacob deGrom and Steven Matz. You're going to have Noah Syndergaard under contract for one more year as well, but you're not really going to know. People think Tommy John is this automatic thing. 12 months, 14 months, you're back, you're better than ever. It's really not that way. And we see examples time and time again, whether it's Zach Wheeler is a great one, a guy who underwent Tommy John.
2 years.
Yeah, it cost him 2 years. Really, it cost him 3 years before he was back pitching the way he wanted to. And he did make it all the way back, and he made it back to an elite level, but it wasn't automatic, and it took a long time, and it took a lot longer. So I'm not saying Noah Syndergaard is going to go down that same path, but if he does, or regardless of whether he does, you're going to go into next offseason not knowing what you have in him. You're not going to know if he's going to be ready to go and help you on opening day, or if it's going to take deeper into the season, a month into the season, 3 months into the season. Maybe it takes the entire season for him to get back and really have his command back and be pitching well the way he wants. So it's going to be an extraordinarily difficult offseason for the Mets to plan next year. They're going to have to fill out their rotation, and they're going to have to do it not knowing what they're going to get from one of their best starting pitchers. So tough times, yes, for the Mets in 2020 without Noah Syndergaard, but I think the more intriguing thing might even be 2021 and how they go about planning with or without him.
Yeah, that's a very good point too. I mean, hopefully we'll get baseball this season, and we'll maybe like cross that bridge when we get to it. But yeah, it's a very good point how the Mets, what's their starting pitching going to be like next season. And also just wanted to, with Tommy John surgery, just wanted to get your thoughts on the epidemic that's been going around baseball with all these Tommy John surgeries happening. I know you're not a doctor, obviously, but is there just, you think, a way like pitchers can prevent this? Because it's weird. It looks like it could happen at any age or any stage of your career. I think every guy on the Mets staff has had it now, or is going to have it. We saw like deGrom and Matz and like Harvey had it at young stages in their career, but we've also seen guys have it in the prime of their careers, like Chris Sale, Syndergaard, Johnny Cueto. Just what are your thoughts on this epidemic? I mean, like I said, you're not a doctor, but like, is there a way you think?
I'm definitely not a doctor. I'm definitely not a doctor.
Is there a way like you think this can be prevented? Maybe starting at the youth level, or just love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, if there was a way to prevent it, then it wouldn't happen because everybody would be following that path. The fact of the matter is we don't know how to prevent it. We know what the risk factors are, and velocity is a big one. In Noah Syndergaard's case, you're talking about a guy who can throw 101, who is the hardest throwing starting pitcher in baseball on average since 2015. So this is a guy who has always been aware of those risk factors and knows that, he could potentially be staring at an elbow injury someday. But what do you do if you're a pitcher? If velocity is what makes you good, all you can kind of do is do the best you can to take care of your body, to take care of your arm, to work out the right way, to focus on your mechanics, try and make sure they're as clean as possible, eat right, do everything that you should be doing anyway as an elite athlete, and then cross your fingers and hope. Because if it comes for you, it's going to come for you. And I think most pitchers, most hard-throwing pitchers, but that pretty much encapsulates 98% of the pitchers in baseball today.
Nowadays, right? Yeah.
Right. I think they know that at some point it's probably going to come for them. And like you said, pretty much everyone in the Mets, whether it's Syndergaard or Jacob deGrom, Matt Harvey back in the day, Steven Matz, all of these young hard-throwing pitchers who came up and who were that big wave for them, they all got it.
Yeah,
and that's not unique to the Mets. That's not something that's LOL Mets, they're mismanaging pitchers. No, this is something that happens with every single team around baseball. You look at the Nationals, it's happened with them, with Strasburg and plenty of their other younger pitchers. You just pick a team, pick out their 5 best pitchers, and I guarantee you at least 3 of them have had Tommy John surgery.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we know the answer to. It sucks for the game because you want the stars healthy.
Yep.
And at some point, I'm sure the greatest medical minds out there, who are her, most certainly not me, will figure out a way, either to prevent this, to help it, like you said, from the youth level on up, or maybe we get a better surgery in the future. And not to say that Tommy John's not a great surgery. It was a groundbreaking surgery, and it saved a lot of careers and helped a lot of people through injuries that years ago would have just ended their baseball careers. Really groundbreaking stuff. But can we come up with a surgery in the next 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it might be, that has guys back in 6 months as opposed to 12 to 18? Can we, can we have an operation that's maybe not so invasive, that guys can be back throwing in 3 months? I mean, the possibilities are endless when you go down that medical rabbit hole in terms of what this could one day be, but we're not there yet. And we're still at the point where if you throw hard, you're at risk of having Tommy John surgery. And if you have Tommy John surgery, you're going to be out for a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe longer than that. So yeah, it sucks for the game. It's not ideal. It's not what anyone wants. Every team individually is working on ways to combat that. The league as a whole is working on ways to combat that. Amateur baseball is working on ways to combat that. But it's tricky. Throwing a baseball very hard is not natural. No. It's not something that the human body takes to very kindly. And we have not figured out a way to get around that quite yet in the way that baseball players want.
Yeah, and it's just kind of puzzling, too, because you talk to older guys who, like back in the day, 60s, 70s, 80s, they were pitching like complete games like it was nothing and making their starts every 5 days or 4 days or whatever. And you would just think in these times with all the advanced technology and, all the advances we made, and guys are pitching less now. They're not pitching. Complete games are rarity today. Guys are going 6 innings. Like 6 innings is almost like the complete game now. So it's just very puzzling how, it's so prevalent, this injury now, given that guys are pitching less in terms of innings. Maybe it just comes down to the velocity, or just
but then that's hard. The thing is you say that, but that's making the assumption that the only thing that matters is total workload, total innings, things like that, or even pitches within a game, things like that. Right. Those things probably do matter, but they're not the only risk factors. And if you could tell, if you could say to a pitcher, okay, if you limit yourself to 180 innings or less in a season, or if you limit yourself to 100 pitches or less in any given game, you're never going to have Tommy John surgery. Well, of course, everyone would do that, but that's not the answer. That's not realistic. The fact of the matter is, every single time you go out there and take the mound and throw a baseball as hard as you can, you're putting yourself at risk. And that doesn't matter if you throw 1 pitch in a game or if you throw 120 pitches in a game. Now, you can mitigate the risks by throwing fewer pitches, for sure. But at the end of the day, if you're a pitcher, your job is to pitch, and you're going to have to spend those bullets at some point. And like I said, every time you fire a 100-mile-an-hour fastball or even a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, you are putting yourself at risk for hurting your elbow.
Yeah. Yeah, and I saw your article. You had talked with Noah Syndergaard back in 2016, and he almost admitted it's almost something that's out of your control in a sense. And
it is.
It's a little scary.
Absolutely out of it. But if you're Noah Syndergaard and you're getting paid millions of dollars to throw baseballs, just the fear of that one day happening to you is not going to be enough to get you to stop throwing baseballs. Nor are you going to go and change the way you pitch. Noah Syndergaard could go out there and start throwing 4-seam fastballs at 89 miles an hour. And would that lessen the risk of a future arm injury? Of course it would. But all of a sudden he's not Noah Syndergaard anymore. He's not an effective pitcher if his fastball is 89 miles an hour. So there's only so much you can do. At the end of the day, if you want to be a professional pitcher, it's just an occupational hazard that you have to accept. No different than, if you lift boxes for a living, maybe you are more at risk of throwing your back out than someone else. If you do this or that, if you work in a hospital, you're probably more at risk of getting sick than anyone else. Every job out there has unique hazards and issues to it. For a major league pitcher, it just happens to be a very public one and something that we can see in real time. And that is throwing a baseball really, really hard puts you at risk for an elbow injury.
Yep. Yeah, of course. And I just also want to get your opinion on this. Like, what do you think when we look back like 10, 15 years from now, the legacy of, you think about the Mets, like big five starting pitchers. We all dreamt of the dream scenario: Harvey, Wheeler, deGrom, Matz, Syndergaard, all going back to back, and we envisioned all this success they were going to have individually and the team success that they would have. And unless they go on a big postseason run this year or next year, make it deep, go to the World Series, how do you think we'll look back on this era of these guys? And do you think almost we're going to look at it as of a what could have been scenario, like just potential that was never met, almost a regeneration K again? Like, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, certainly there's that's part of it, what could have been, but I also think you have to look at it realistically. And for that reason, I think at the time, even if you go back to 2012, 2013, when the Mets were really beginning to construct this stable of young arms, and it really probably started with drafting Matt Harvey in 2010, and he came up in 2012 and made a stir right away. But even back then, you look at that, and there were people questioning, okay, the Mets are building this young nucleus, this young core, and they're doing it around starting pitching. Is that wise? Because pitchers break.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing.
So I don't think anyone's super surprised that this is what's happened, that these guys all wound up having Tommy John surgery, and that with the exception of Jacob deGrom, who far exceeded expectations, maybe a lot of those careers didn't work out the way they wanted. But I also think maybe they did. Maybe if I told you back in 2010 or 2012 or whatever it might be, that you've got Matt Harvey and deGrom and Matz and Wheeler and Syndergaard, and that one of those guys is going to win multiple Cy Youngs, and one of them is going to have a couple good years and flame out, and then another one's going to be inconsistent and look really good at his best, and then ultimately get injured too. One of them's going to have Tommy John surgery, will struggle to come back, but ultimately will come back and will get a big contract with another team. One of them will have injury troubles early in his career, but will kind of stabilize and become a mid-rotation starter for the Mets. Like, if I told you all those outcomes individually without telling you the names, that seems pretty believable to me. Like, that is the range of outcomes for these guys. So what would have been way more surprising to me, and what should be way more surprising to anyone, would be if I told you back then, oh yeah, those 5 great young starters in the Mets have, they're all going to be perfectly healthy. They're all going to win the Cy Young. They're just all going to be aces. They're going to give you 200 innings. Of course, that would sound ridiculous at the time. So why, in retrospect, are we surprised when that's what happens? The outcomes ran the gamut, and that to me is not that surprising. And I think the Mets pretty much got what you could think they could get, in that you got one really, 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 really good starter, one of the best starters of all time. And then behind that, you got kind of a mixed bag of guys who ranged from, league average to a little better than that, to a little worse than that, injuries, all sorts of things. So that was always the danger of building around starting pitching.
Yeah,
it was a danger the Mets fully accepted, and it did get them to a World Series. I think a lot of people would look back on this a lot more fondly if they had won a World Series.
Yeah, of course.
And they still have a chance to, with some of these guys, deGrom, Matz, even Syndergaard's still potentially in-house. But yeah, it's tough to win a World Series. It's tough to stay healthy as a pitcher, and I think the Mets found that out for sure.
Yeah, and that's definitely a unique perspective you put on it, more as looking at the individual, individual kind of stats and success of the guys but I think people were more looking at the team. I think people were expecting a lot more team success. Maybe that's where it's a little more disappointing in that regard. I mean, like you said, the World Series appearance,
and that was
the wild card game next year. I don't really consider that a playoff appearance because they didn't actually get in. But yeah, in a sense, it was just like one playoff appearance in the last 10.
Yeah, and I don't
years.
think that's because of starting pitching. I think the starting pitching was a strength of the team for a lot of years. I think they didn't do enough or weren't able to do enough to supplement that with a strong lineup. You look back, I mean, really 2019 is the best lineup they've had in a long time. And before that, they were trying to win for a lot of years with good starting pitching and not a lot there offensively. They tried to win for many years with virtually no bench at all. And then finally in 2015, they wound up making those trades, and all of a sudden you have Juan Uribe and Kelly Johnson on your bench, and you start going places. They've had bullpen struggles for years. So I think the reason why this Mets team or this Mets era hasn't fulfilled its potential is not because of starting pitching. To the contrary, I think starting pitching has more or less held up its end of the bargain. It's the other aspects of the team that were kind of the letdowns in those years.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, we saw the bullpen, the bullpen last year. That was just pretty much the prime culprit of what went wrong. But yeah, I see where you're coming with that. And just transitioning now, I'd love to get your thoughts on Luis Rojas as manager in the short time you interacted with him. You know, it actually seems like some people are more pleased that he ended up being the manager and that his time was going to come eventually, that he was going to be the manager, even though obviously people were high on Carlos Beltran as well. But just what's your overall thoughts on Luis Rojas so far?
I'm a big Luis Rojas fan. I have been for a long time. I've known him for a long time. And I was not I'm there's no doubt in my mind that you give him the tools to succeed, that he's going to do as well as anyone. And that's not a slight on Carlos Beltran, who I was very curious about as a manager. Certainly a flashier name for a lot of people, and I think it would have been a very interesting guy to cover as manager, Carlos Beltran. But I think maybe the standard deviation of outcomes for him would have been bigger. He didn't have the experience as a manager as Luis Rojas, who's done it time and again in the minor leagues, who knew every single person in that room. So, I think the floor for Luis Rojas is very, very high. I don't think, I don't think you're going to have to worry about a manager losing you games when he's at the helm. And that's an important thing to have, especially in this market. I think the question mark with him coming in was, I should say, how does he deal with the media? How does he deal with this giant spotlight on a guy who's been relatively anonymous throughout his coaching career, mostly in the minor leagues? Even last year, he was on the big league coaching staff, but was so far removed from the spotlight. And it's a small sample size, but in spring training, I thought Luis handled himself very well. I thought he, was professional. There's kind of a quiet strength behind his messages and some of the things that he says. And you never know for sure. He's not emotional at all. And you never know for sure until you get out there. And I would say, see what happens, when the ish hits the fan, because it will. And there will be times this summer or whenever the season begins, there will be times when things don't go right, when things go poorly. And how do you react? And I think we saw with the last manager that he didn't react well at times and could exacerbate problems, things like that. Yeah. And I don't see Luis Rojas going down that path, but you never know. You never know how people react until they're faced with that adversity. So we'll see. And I think it would be unfair to say the jury's not still out on him because we haven't seen him manage a big league game yet. but I can say that knowing him for the years that I have, there's no one who's going to take this more seriously, and no one who kind of comes in better equipped to handle this situation. I would be shocked if he doesn't do just fine.
Last question, just to wrap up. I was just curious on what's your, if and God willing when, as we've talked about throughout it's kind of a theme of the podcast, like if and when the season happens, what's your outlook for the team? I'm sure it changed a lot after the news Monday of Noah Syndergaard. It's probably, like you said, this team had World Series aspirations, but what is your outlook now for the team if and when there is a season?
Yeah, it did change a lot. I'm not going to lie about that. I thought this was a very talented team, one of the most talented teams in the National League. I thought the path was going to be difficult just given the division that they're in. If anything, I thought weirdly people are underestimating the Braves, who are, a 100-win threat. People are almost underestimating the Nationals, despite the fact that they came off the World Series. I mean, everyone expected them to take a step back, but they're still the reigning champs. And you have to give them that respect. So it was going to be difficult, but I thought the Mets were going to be every bit in the mix as everyone else. Now, this makes it this makes it harder. Not having Noah Syndergaard makes it harder. Does that mean they can't compete? No, I think they've stocked themselves with enough depth that they can compete. I still think there's some nice upside in the rotation with Jacob deGrom, obviously, Marcus Stroman, Steven Matz coming off, 2 pretty solid years, and now no longer has to worry about his rotation spot. Is it the best rotation in baseball? No, it's not. And for a lot of years, you could make the argument that it was, but it's not anymore. But it's still a decent one. It's still a good one. You still have one of the best pitchers in baseball, if not the best pitcher in baseball, anchoring it. And then to go along with it, you have what I think is a really exciting lineup.
Definitely. I
think you have a better bench than you've had in a long time, especially if you get anything from Yoenis Cespedes.
Yeah.
And I think you have a much better bullpen than you did. So this is a good team. This is a competitive team. The road is still tough. The division didn't get any easier, and now you're lacking a Noah Syndergaard to ply your way through it. But this is still very much a team that I expect to be in the mix. Will they win the division? Gun to my head, I would probably go with the field on that, just because I need to see it to believe it, and I've seen it from the Braves, and I've seen it from the Nationals, and I haven't seen it over 6 months yet from the Mets, or over however many games it winds up being from the Mets. But I wouldn't count them out by any stretch of the imagination. I do still think this is one of the most talented teams in the National League, and if they get hot, as we saw last August, they could go on a run.
Yeah. I mean, as a Met fan, I'm hoping they can go on that run again. But we'll see, as we've been talking about through this episode, God willing. Hopefully we have a season. But that pretty much wraps up everything I wanted to get to. Anthony, just wanted to thank you again so much for coming on. As I said earlier, hope you stay safe and healthy during this, and talk to you soon, and hope you have a good day.
You as well, Chris. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. And that'll conclude things on this latest edition of the Basic Thoughtonomics podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris Grosso. I want to thank Anthony again so much for coming on. You could follow him on social channels for all the latest Mets news. On Twitter and Instagram, his handle's at Anthony DiComo. You could follow me on social channels as well. My personal Twitter and Instagram, it's at ChrisGrosso16. Podcast Twitter handles at Basic Thought Pod. On Instagram, it's at Basic Thoughts Pod. But yeah, just want to thank everyone again so much for listening. Baseball, Mets fans, hope you guys enjoyed that one. Hope everyone's staying safe and healthy with everything that's going on. Hope you're staying inside. And thanks, guys, and hope you have a good week.